Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Austin Avenue, Clark Corner. You may already be noticing that there is a member of the Clark Corner not here. My dear sister Challen, Lord bless her, who knows where she is? She's not here. But we do have a special guest here today who is going to be here anyway. Her name is Alice.
Hi.
And, she's along for the ride, and you'll see very soon why she particularly is riding this train today. But, as always, I am Austin, Gareth. Choo-choo. Let's go. As I'm riding this train of a journey, I always like a little bit of refreshment. And so, Gareth, what do you have to refresh us today?
Okay, well, I'm excited about this one today. I've been cursed with bad coffee for the past... I won't say that. I've been cursed with subpar coffee for the past 2 weeks. And partly not really leaned into that and done a pretty terrible job of brewing it. That's my own error. But I decided to whip out the whole beans today. And so we have... oh, goodness, I can't remember where this is from. An Antiguan coffee that one of my friends got me when I was living in France. She was Norwegian, so it's kind of a train because she went to Guatemala, got this coffee, brought it back to France, gave it to me, and I brought it back here, and now have just ground it. I will say that it was roasted a while ago, about 3 months ago, so we're hitting the end of the time when it's even recommended to use at all. Most people, when they say after about 3 months after roast, you really shouldn't be using it. The ideal window is inside a month. And so we're going to maybe see some of that affecting the coffee, and also our coffee machine is not the highest quality as well, so we'll see that play in as well. And this is the first time making that. But that's my little disclaimer. I'll give a little quick description of it. It is... Nope, I won't. I'll have you drink it, then give it me.
Also, my cup is right over there. Also, props to this man. We don't have a grinder, and so he put the whole... no, this is good, because people... We are coffee for the people, by the people. He threw those beans in the daggum blender.
Now, I will say I had to sieve out the actual usable coffee, because obviously a blender isn't made to grind coffee, so we have that. I was considering that. I just didn't toss it in the blender and use whatever came out. I was sieving it? That doesn't sound right. Whatever it is.
Do I get to...
You get to have some too.
Okay.
And so,
my cup is
this
right
is the...
Do you want me to get it?
No, I can't get
Oh, he's gonna get it.
For the first round of brewing, it didn't turn out terribly. You're supposed to drink the water that's in there. And...
Woo! That is a thing with the new coffee machine.
It mostly got on the chair. It just adds.
In case anyone, well, no one ever would have thought that we were putting on any airs, but in case anyone did for some reason, we continually humble ourselves before before Grandma. Hello, Grandma.
Hi, Grandma.
3, 2, 1,
go. Yeah, it's a little bit more bitter than I would care for. But it's more complex than the other coffee.
Oh, it is more. I think each week I say a few more things, hopefully, that are meaningful. I do taste more layers, I think. I don't taste very much acidity.
It is.
Or is it acidity?
I would say it has... It's shifting into the bitter zone because it's not perfectly brewed, so it's starting to get bitter. But there is a good amount of acidity in it. The notes that are supposed to be there are... Aromas are floral, citrusy, and flavors are chocolate, caramel, sweetness. I didn't know that was a flavor. And citrusy, which I was
not enough chocolate, but
is that how you like your? What do you drink now? Are you a coffee drinker?
I don't drink coffee.
Oh, yikes!
So this is I will sometimes drink coffee, but I'm definitely not a regular consumer of coffee. I tend to be sensitive to caffeine, so...
Oh, we're gonna get jittery Alice today.
I might handle caffeine like a small child.
We're here for that.
We'll see.
Fun fact, It is. We actually know the variety of the bean that is used. So it is from the, pardon me, coffee snobs if I mispronounce it, the Caturra and the Bourbon variety, which I guess grows specifically in. I keep on forgetting where this is. Shoot. Antigua? No, it's not Antigua. It is Antigua, which is in Guatemala once again. So these are
Antigua
also
an island too somewhere?
I don't think so.
Do you know? Antigua?
I do not know.
Does anyone know?
So these are notes that come specifically with this variety, this altitude, and of course also variety comes from the soil as well that the coffee is grown in. So all that plays a part in the flavor. But let's vote.
Let's vote.
It's just we're just voting yes or no, right?
Yes, if we would drink this coffee again.
If it would go on to the next round.
I'm going to be a bit harsher on this coffee because
Are you starting?
Yes, I'm starting. I'm going to give it a yes just because I've been looking forward to drinking this coffee and it hasn't let me down. I do think it can be done brewed a lot better because I can taste the bitterness sneaking in there. And I really think it could be done really well if we had a proper grinder, proper pour over, things like that. So it's a yes, but barely.
For me, it is a yes because I taste it. It feels like a more full-bodied coffee, and you know how I feel about big-bodied coffee. So, big-bodied coffee, we're here for you. It's a yes from me. Alice.
Okay, so in the chance that when I would drink coffee, I would be willing to drink this again, so I would say yes. Partially out of an appreciation for how it was made and just kind of the affinity and love and care that has gone into this cup of coffee. Love makes coffee taste better sometimes. I do see where you're talking about like the citrus and floral. Don't know where the chocolate is, but if it's not like chocolate, then it doesn't count for me. So.
Well, usually this is the time of the show where we get Dr. Gregory, but today we're not going to do that, and we are going to ask a deep question today, and respond to it. And by respond, I mean I really more want to hear how Alice would respond. And so, Alice. Here we go. In all honesty, and more to take down to a perhaps more serious level, though I very rarely take myself very seriously, at the time when this video is filmed, several weeks ago, was when George Floyd was killed, and then we've had, actually maybe it's been a couple weeks, maybe just 2 weeks, and then we've had a lot of riots around the country. There's been a lot of social unrest, a lot of civil unrest, social unrest, a lot of things. And it's hard sometimes when I'm on social media to really know, as just kind of I would probably say you're very run-of-the-mill, I guess, white guy. Though we're all unique, of course. God makes everyone special. I don't say that flippantly. But it's hard sometimes in the midst of the screaming and the yelling and the anger and the frustration on social media to know what the path forward is for reconciliation. And I don't expect you to know all the answers, and I don't expect you necessarily to have the one thing. I think there's a lot of paths forward, and please speak on that. But I would love, as someone who is a person of color, to just kind of hear what your thoughts are on how we move forward in reconciliation, kind of really practically, not just kind of the spouting, everyone needs to love each other, because yes, but something perhaps practically that we can take with us as well. So, talking stick,
Sure.
over to you.
Yeah, so there are some things I want to clarify first. I definitely do not look like a person of color. Some people, you might look at me and be like, oh, she might be mixed with something else. My father is black. However, in terms of how our society is set up, I can still operate and pass and be received as white in a lot of different ways, which is important in considering how I interact with everything. And two, I want to clarify that Austin and I have known each other for a very long time. He's come to my birthday parties. He's been my date to different like dances, and we're good friends, and we've had these conversations before. But most importantly, there's a relationship established. And I think that's important to clarify because it can be tempting as someone that is not familiar with what's going on, or like as a white person, to just kind of take this mentality of, oh, well, let me just like ask this person of color to like fill me in and like explain to me what's going on. And the reality is it's not their responsibility to do that. This work of anti-racism has been going for centuries. And when I say that, it's not just racism in the sense of like a few individuals that are hateful and like do these things that are outright like very overt, like we think of lynchings, KKK, like apartheid, like all of these different things. But and that most certainly is racism. But what there are many things that are difficult about talking about it. One, our society in general has avoided talking about race. So we learn bits and pieces here and there. And then there's this kind of water that's been brewing and boiling because it's gone unchecked. There have been some people that will acknowledge it, while others are saying like, hey, this isn't a problem. And part of that comes from how we define different terms that we use. And a big one is just like racism in and of itself. So one way that our like racial discourse is very limited is when we use the term racism with the definition of like the individualized people. Like it's an individualized thing. Like these individual people hold this attitude and like have this hatred. When the majority of the conversation, like, wow, it is very clear, and I think most people, like, I would be hard pressed to find someone that genuinely believes like hating a black person is terrible. Like there are some people out there, obviously, but that's not.
You'd be surprised that there is people that would say hating black person, that's okay. You'd be surprised that like people that would openly say that, or the opposite.
Right. I would be like I know that it would be a lot harder for me to find someone like pretty much any of my white Christian friends, a lot of white people that I know and love, most would not ever outwardly or even genuinely say like I hate black people.
Okay.
Like I believe that that's not an attitude that most people have. However, where the issue comes in is that when we say racism, we being those working to dismantle this systemic racism, we are just that, like referring to how it's been ingrained into our different institutions and everything. And I have a tendency to just kind of like prattle on. And so in order to help that, I have brought myself some little notes here.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to go to school.
Yeah, so what I have here, and I'm sure, Austin, that you'll link to different things. I've got lots of resources we can share. But what I have here is kind of like my summary / condensed version of an article that I read by this organization called Race Forward. Mm-hmm. And this organization exists to, like, just that, like, move racial discourse forward, make, like, around the world, like, make these conversations happen in healthy, true, honest ways, while also looking, like, not denying, like, okay, let's look at what is this system that we're talking about? What does this mean? What can I do? And, like, how do I interact with this? And so they did multiple studies on lots of different things, looking at just kind of in general, a lot of it in the media, but also in even like professional articles and different things on how racism is talked about. And so they have this article. It's like a 2-part series that they have called like Moving Forward. And the first part is really it really just breaks down these very common ways that we or things that we do, practices that we take in racial discourse that hinder like moving the conversation forward. And so in that, just kind of wanted to like briefly like kind of gloss over them in this, because the reality is this is not a simple concept, and it's not a simple work. There's not like as you mentioned, it's not as simple as just like love each other. Like, although we should, and like for as Christians, for those that are, that's what we're called to do. And I would even charge that as believers, having that call to love one another means that you should also have an interest and stake in fighting and dismantling racism. So the first practice is individualizing.
So real quick to clarify, what you're going to give us now are ways that the conversation about the race for it is being hindered.
Right.
The way the discussion, the dialogue is being hindered.
Right. So these are practices that are unhelpful to moving the conversation forward.
Okay.
So the first is individualizing racism, which like we talked about that already. The idea of concentrating on the individual and like personal thoughts or acts of prejudice. And what this does is it reinforces the common misconception that racism is just a personal problem that can be resolved simply by taking care of those people. Rather than having more helpful debates about, okay, what kind of policies are in place, like what around in this environment has produced this kind of attitude to allow it to persist. And the second one is falsely equating incomparable acts, which I'll just kind of read the definition they have for it. It's drawing a parallel between an act or expression of racial bias from privileged whites and from that of comparatively disadvantaged people of color without taking into account the power differential between the two. So that's a lot of words. I know that's like, okay, what does that even mean? I think that, and I like am more familiar with these. And the effect on that is focuses on the individual that's committed like a racist act, but like encourages the audience to kind of take this concept of colorblindness on, which that's like, again, I'm just saying a bunch of words right now unless there's a thing to point to. And the one that I found helpful for kind of helping me understand how they're explaining it here is the case of Trayvon Martin, where in the dialogue about like who was guilty and like who made like this racist, like Zimmerman's lawyer remarked on the term that Trayvon made the comment of like this creepy ass cracker, which like cracker is obviously like a derogatory term for white people, but use that like focused in on that, and rather than really addressing the issue of like, okay, but this man just murdered this child. So looking at it, so falsely equating incomparable acts is like saying, oh, well, Trayvon's the one that brought race into it because he said this comment about him being a cracker, versus looking at, here's this man that was already told by police to stop and still is like pursuing him and has this perception and acting under this perception that because of the color of his skin, like he is a threat.
Can I maybe ask for a clarifying
Sure.
moment? In the way specifically, you know, we'll use a different example of the things that have kind of happened really recently. Would a way of that concept being in play for kind of the conversations we're having right now would be like when a conversation is taking place, saying, look, well, Breonna Taylor's apartment was like in the mix-up of there was drugs happening, and so like that piece of information is why is like it's unfortunate, but if her apartment wasn't in the mix-up with this, like if she hadn't been picking up drugs, then she wouldn't have been there. Like the police wouldn't have been there in the first place, which is like kind of tilting trying to even the scales when they're not even. Is that kind of the same way of
Yes.
like if we're justifying
Right.
a much larger act by
Right.
putting on the other side of the scale,
Right.
oh well, her apartment was somehow involved with drugs,
Right.
Allegedly.
Ignoring the reality that they did not have a warrant. They went in and shot her while she was asleep.
Yeah. Okay.
Two very, very different acts. But because they both may have like some sort of relation to race, it can like sometimes people are very tempted to like compare the two.
Yeah.
And the third one, which I think is super common, is diverting from race. So this has a lot to do with, I'll just read the definition because people are smarter than I am. The practice of asserting that other social identities besides race, such as class, gender, or sexual orientation, are the real determining factors behind a given social inequity. So looking at social inequity, kind of just defining that as like an injustice, a way that's people are not getting what they need, right? So we look at these things, we look at statistics and see Black people are poor, or look at kind of a broad sense of here are all of these people, let's look at like who is succeeding and who is not succeeding. Diverting from race would look like saying, oh, well, this person like is not succeeding and this person has had these struggles because they are poor, not because they're Black. Therefore, like we don't even need to talk about like how him being Black or her being Black affects what like where they are today. While like yes, it's true that like we have intersectional identities with like our our sexual orientation, our religion, the color of our skin, how we grew up, like all of these things are different factors, but it is very common to divert from the racial factor because it's highly uncomfortable. But that doesn't help move the conversation forward because in focusing and lasering
by excluding that from the conversation,
right,
instead of like pushing into the uncomfortable and saying, like acknowledging something else, but also like saying we also need to include the racial aspect.
We need to consider this in how all of this is played out.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you have any questions for me so far? Because I feel there's so much packed into this that I could spend a very long time talking and still not even scratch the surface. So I want to pause because that's the whole purpose of this, is to like be able to move forward with clarity, with some practical steps. What kind of questions do you have for me so far?
I guess the question I would have for you, Alice, is how, as your experience reading these articles, interacting with other people, how you've kind of personally unpacked that and then are in your day-to-day life, like offering that back to the world, and then also as part of your world, us.
Yeah. So there is a lot loaded into that. Part of it is acknowledging that I do have white privilege, which is a very unique. People that are like multiracial or biracial definitely have an interesting play in all of it. And like half of my family is Black, but I am never going to experience the same kinds of things that they have because like my skin, like I pass as white. I'm not going to be discriminated against by most people. But so these articles and everything, overall what I've found is that I didn't need these articles to tell me that there is something that is wrong in the system. Growing up, was raised to be aware of this is how my ancestors came here. there's one thing about being in school and like having this history taught to us of like, okay, like yes, like slavery happened, but what I think at large the white community forgets and doesn't necessarily take into consideration is that those effects, while that was years ago, are very like ingrained into everything, and that affects family like for generations and how people are able to operate. This work is very important that they're doing of different studies people do to like prove these different things, but the bottom line is, are you willing to dive into and really try to understand the problem? It boils down to, are you willing to seek out, like when people say these things like systemic racism, are you willing to look into that more and like for yourself actually go and read these articles, actually go and try to understand more of, okay, we have these terms of like inequities, like what is it that people are saying? Because you may perceive, you look around and say, well, we don't have like black and whites, like it doesn't say colored only, we don't have these different like very overt things, but racism is less of personal prejudice, while it is that, and more of an ideology that has ingrained itself into different things. Ideas are not as easy to put out, which can be good for good ideas, but for horrible off ideas, they're not. And part of that looks at diving into and facing the ideology of white supremacy, which is obviously very uncomfortable, and for many reasons, but it's important because that is the ideology under which our society operates. And when I say white supremacy, I know that like, I'm sure you get images of like the KKK or like these nationalists like going and kind of these fringe like extreme groups. But the reality is that in so many ways, unintentionally, every day, and how you interact, these attitudes you hold, or like all these different things, we often, if we do not recognize like the privilege that we have, we are continuing to operate in the society and allow this system of white supremacy to continue to run, which may provide you privilege, and I'm sure in conversations before, it can be very frustrating to have someone look at you and see this hard work that you may have done and just kind of consider like, oh, well, it was just handed to you because you were white. Mm-hmm. Which, yes, like that does play a factor in it, and that's important to consider. But I think that speaks, just like going at that, I just want to point to how focusing in on like recognizing your privilege is not just you going around being like, oh my gosh, I'm so terrible, and like let me have this guilt and like shame that I beat myself with all the time. Mm-hmm. It's more recognizing, okay, here is where I've been placed in this system that is bad for everyone, including me, and I can't fully be free until like all of these other people are free too. Like, it's not, if I want to be treated equally, like we need to raise these people up and make sure that everyone is on the same playing field. Yeah. Not just like, here, let's have these like separate but like equal things, but let's acknowledge this disparity, this long-term injustice that has happened, and deal with that and raise that up so that we're more on a level playing field, rather than having this tilted playing field and look like having up here looking down and being like, what's the problem? Like, why can't you get up here? Sort of a deal. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
Put a little meat on, to use the imagery, of the difference between, and I like what you said because I think it is that it's a weird place to like, okay, it's not healthy to just kind of swim in the pool of shame.
Right.
Like, okay, I have these privileges that some even could interpret as like blessings.
Right.
Like a blessing was given to you, a blessing like you did not deserve, and
right.
like, but it was given to you, and like,
right.
And then, so instead of being glad about the blessing, being shameful, but then also, like, oh, there are people who have not been blessed. And what we believe is our Heavenly Father does want to bless everyone. Mm-hmm. And so, like, what is the pushing blessings towards other people? How does what does that mean? How do we help bless people?
Yeah. Learn. Take the concept of like blessing, which is like good, like that's something we should do, but try to remove any attachment you have with the word blessing from like material possessions and different things, and look more at like, let's dig deeper into the system of like, okay, let's look at in general what is our societal attitude towards these people, because you can give people whatever you want, but if the underlying attitude does not change, if that ideology is not addressed, then it's not going to change. How you can do that is really honestly by diving into and trying to understand what is white supremacy and how do you relate to it. There is an author and anti-racist educator, her name is Layla Saad, who put out a book in, she released it as a workbook originally and an Instagram challenge, but then early this year published it as a book. It's called Me and White Supremacy. And it is literally a guide where she walks through like what is white privilege with like different reflective prompts to really do this hard work of understanding, okay, where have I interacted with this, and like what even does it mean with this system, and what can I do about it, like very practically step by step. I would say go ahead and order that as soon as possible. I have it on my Kindle. It is uncomfortable, and it's definitely not like you're not going to do this workbook, like do this book and then come out on the other side and you're just going to be like everything's going to be better. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to cause you to really wrestle more, and to those feelings of guilt and shame, like all of those things, they're going to come up. And it's going to be hard to wrestle with them. But you have to be willing to say, like, okay, like, this is here, and I understand why this is here now, and here's what I can, but I don't have to stay here. I don't have to walk around and live, like, in this guilt. I can use and recognize I have this position of privilege and power in this society, and I can use this position to benefit and, like, address these inequities that are happening and have been happening for a long time. So really it's about learning, like rather than waiting, social media is obviously, people are going to be screaming stuff all over the place, and some are helpful, some are not. There's a large mix of everything. But I truly believe that in order to fully and honestly take on dismantling systemic racism, you need to be able to first understand how you interact with it in the first place, and how like you personally interact with white supremacy and what that like even means, and just come to have a clearer understanding of that. Because once you're able to see that, it's like when you go to the doctor and something is diagnosed, you're able to specifically address that because this specific virus or this specific disease, whatever, like we know what this is now, so this is how we can combat it because we know it's in this part of the body, or however it might be. Learning about white supremacy and learning how to engage with that and what it means and how you've already engaged with that allows you to see, oh, like this is what's wrong. Not just because, yes, like police brutality is awful and that needs to be addressed, and obviously like there's protests as a result from those things are part of what has triggered that, but it's so much bigger than that. It's not just the police, it's in everything. And ultimately while I believe that we all are called to like fight for justice, I do believe that ultimately it is a sin issue, which is something that is said often by white evangelicals, that kind of glosses over like doing the hard work of looking into white supremacy. But the bottom line is, I believe that the only true hope that we have is in Christ. And that one day he's going to come and eradicate, like, we're not going to reach a point where we are able to completely eradicate racism apart from Christ. Like, we're going to fight, and I'm going to do everything I can to get rid of it while I'm here, but we're not going to see a perfect world until the Lord comes back and redeems it and makes the world as it was supposed to be. Yeah, I think there's so much.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just because this is the struggle that I've been kind of bumping into, is I think partly because the people have such a strong idea of shame when they hear these words racist, when they hear this word white supremacy, that they don't want to associate with anything that is being labeled on. So I've talked to people, seen dialogues where pretty much people are trying as hard as they can to distance themselves from those terms at all costs. And partly because they don't feel like they're experiencing what they call racist activities, partly because of what you said 10 or so minutes ago about not an individual that was kind of labeled, this is a racist person, this large, massively unjust action is racist, and that's kind of the bar that's set at this level of atrocity, not here on this day-to-day activity or day-to-day mindset. And so I have just the way you communicate the fact that, hey, white privileged person, you are carrying things that you've learned or picked up that puts you in a supreme, oh, that sounds weird, puts you in a higher place, a supreme place than everyone else.
Right.
And
in how society operates.
Yes, in how society operates, yes, of course. And you don't have to feel shame and guilt out because of them, but you do have to address that they exist in your psyche. And that's the, wall, because I've seen some people that have been and of course I'm limited because I've been staying at home and pretty much have only been seeing what's happened on Facebook and such. And it seems like some people are just screaming, if you don't admit this, you're the worst person ever.
Right.
And I'm well, that isn't going to get anyone to admit anything or really examine themselves ever. But I do want to get people, have people go to that deeper place of, whoa, wait a second, I just thought something that I immediately pushed away because I was oh, that's not true. But the fact is there was a root there that just got exposed. Or I just did this thing without even realizing it. And there's a reason for that. Or I got seen this way, but this person next to me was not seen the same way at all. And I guess how do you educate that or encourage people to do the self-educating that I don't see happening a lot. And I see a lot of people in the conservative white community, especially because I have a lot of friends that are more in that community that have been pretty much distancing themselves very, very strongly from all this because they're it doesn't apply to me anymore.
Right. What you're describing is, to me, I'm hearing a lot of that is a result of the attitude and understanding of racism as individual acts. What we're seeing right now, especially, is there are a lot of people, a lot of white people that are, posting all of these things, and I don't know people's hearts. I love to believe that every single person is genuinely seeking to understand inequity and fighting injustice. But the reality is some of that may very well be performative. May very well be an attempt to separate themselves and say, hey, I might be white, but I'm not one of those whites. Yeah. I'm not one of those racist people. And what you need to do with that is learn to accept that some people might see you like that, but that's not who you are. And that should never stop you. The possibility of being perceived as racist should not stop you from trying to understand systemic racism. Our nation, the world, has had this broken understanding of racism for years. Race in itself as a social construct, but that's a whole nother conversation. Although part of this conversation. I would say in the face of seeing or being told, like, if you don't do XYZ, you're racist, or looking around and seeing, okay, there's all these people that are saying these things that are wrong, but, like, does it really apply to me? And how, like, I'm not racist, so, like, I don't personally hate these people or commit these prejudice acts. So, like, how am I responsible? Why do I need to be involved in this sort of a deal? And I would say to that, remember the reality that you are human and we are all human. And if you want justice, if you truly believe that justice, like, everyone should be treated equally, then you need to be able to do the work and understanding to make that happen. And because to step aside and to say, or kind of push off and say, well, here's this just, like, radical movement that's happening, or here's this like, political issue that one particular party is, like, pushing in order to, like, gain different things, that's never going to move the conversation forward. It's only going to have you stay where you are, even move backwards in understanding what the issue actually is. I saw a t-shirt, of course, lots of people posting things, but one of the posts that I liked was a woman that had a t-shirt, and it said, "Not left, not right, forward." And I think that is so important in our consideration of how we, like, interact with all of that. Did I answer your question? It's okay if I didn't. I will try to.
Not especially, but
Okay.
I'm enjoying the dialogue regardless. So, I think it's partly just there isn't, I'm not going to blatantly say there isn't, like, a simple, this is the formula to do things,
Right.
because most of it will happen in the context of relationship.
Right.
And not in the context of, if we all do this, we'll
Right.
all get this result.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's so true.
So, as we wrap our time, perhaps, if I may, let me see if I can summarize a few
Sure.
ideas, and then you can, like, nod yes, you've understood and summarized correctly, or shut it down, get out of the way. I think one thing is, like, kind of this stop, learn, struggle. Which, like, stop separating yourself either way, anyway, like, whether it's in a moving, no matter, like, whether I am for this movement, and, like, and that's a way of, I from what I've heard, like, stopping the conversation, because you're, like, acknowledging but not actually digging.
That's true.
And also saying, like, I'm not a fan of Black Lives Matter, and I'm not a racist. Like, racism isn't what we think. Goodbye. Like, it's not what we think it is. So, like, either side is ending a conversation.
Right.
And so stopping that, kind of going back to those articles, those things that you said, and then learning, and then in that learning, as that learning becomes not an overnight thing,
Right.
not a one conversation,
Right.
not you're going to your black friend and saying, hey, what am I doing wrong? Like,
Please do not do that. Just a very, very truly, do not ask a person of color, do not ask a black person, don't try to engage in them with that conversation without their conscious consent. They deal with enough pain and everything that's going on. They don't need you making that worse by just going up to them and being like, tell me how to fix things. You need to ask them and make sure that they are on board and consciously, like, I am in a place where I have the energy, I have this ability to have this conversation with you right now.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very important to note.
perhaps, and to also even unpack that statement,
Yeah.
is that more because, or did you give that piece of advice because in that can very easily be interpreted as a give me the one and done,
Yes.
as opposed to an actual can I come closer to you in intimacy, like as a human? Is that kind of what you're...
Yes, I would say even kind of part of that, part of being able to come closer in intimacy as a human is being able to understand on a deeper level what they're going through, and kind of what has happened that has put them in that position to experience those things. So I would say that in order to really be able to have kind of those closer conversations, it is really helpful to do your own, like, educating yourself and seeking to learn about what are racial disparities, what are these things. Because when you come with that, you're able to say, hey, this is what I've done this work. Because the reality is, people have been fighting racial inequity for a long time. Mm-hmm. Anti-racist educators are not new. They're not new with George Floyd. Like, they've been out for a long time. It's a matter of recognizing, I haven't been a part of this work. I need to make myself a part of this work. I need to commit to being anti-racist, which is not committing to a political movement. It's literally committing to being anti-racism and dismantling white supremacy as it exists and not allowing it to evolve in any form or fashion. Yes.
So, stop, learn, struggle, like embrace the struggle. I guess that really is the simple, and then kind of that it's not, the leaving it there is like that it's not going to be necessarily a shiny thing.
Right.
That you're going to get to put your stamp on. It's like,
right.
It's more of a reality that we are all humans
right.
struggling together.
It's true.
So would you say that was a good summary of a starting place?
Yeah, I would say overall, I would say that was a good summary. I would just add, though, like, in that kind of area of, like, stop, learn, struggle. Like, it's not, like, just you reach learn and then struggle and then, like, you're good. Like, you're going to continue to learn and struggle. Those things are going to continue.
Yeah.
But in that, I would also add another step, another piece of it, of grow.
Mm-hmm.
Be willing and open to acknowledge, I've believed this, or I've done these things in the past that were not right, and, like, I've learned these things now, and now I understand, like, why this thing that I did before, or this thing that people that look like me did before, in whatever fashion, has not been helpful, but I'm growing. It's okay to like, go back and say, oh, like, I was someone that did not agree with people in the past that were, like, trying to tell this reality, but now I better understand it, and I'm trying to understand it more and, like, work through that together.
Grow. All right. Alice, thank you for being here.
Yes.
This is going to be a super seminar, Austin Avenue, Clark Corner.
Yes.
But it's important, though.
But it is important. So I'm glad we are struggling together.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for being here. If you made it this far, good. Because I would say this is part of all of our journeys. The struggling right here. So, yay. Thank you for watching. Please share. Please talk about what you've heard.
Yeah.
Question it. And dig. As you, in your own journey, are going through this as well. The comments will be open. Thanks for watching. I will do a quick note that this is we're going to take a brief hiatus from Austin Avenue as I am going into another part of the state. But stay tuned, because after I get back, more Austin Avenue will come. So stay tuned for that. Everyone out there, stay studly, stay strong. Huzzah.